Barb.
Thank you.
Now, for those that have never watched any footage before, this is Beautiful Barb. Those that have read any of my 6 books, you'll hear about this woman, Beautiful Barb. And when I started to film this web series, and Barb's a busy woman who's always, through the last 24 years of knowing each other, she's often, she's a career woman and travels around, and so I know I have to book her in advance to get her to come, but I'm so grateful that she came to spend time with us today. We want to talk a little bit about women, alcoholism, parenting, children, men, all of it. But I think I'd just like to kick off with thanking you. I know, look, we could end up crying because we kind of do that a bit. Tears of joy. Barb's the first woman I met that cried tears of joy in front of me.
She always makes me cry. That's what the tissues are for.
I'm just going to quickly frame it when I met Barb. I'm 10 days clean and sober, so I'm now 57 this year. I just turned 33. I got clean and sober on October the 12th, 1995. And so it would have been probably October the 22nd. It's 10 days later. I remember it. I don't know why, I just do. And I used to go to this women's recovery group in Brisbane. And I went there because it was like, I love chickens and chooks. Don't ask me why. They just make me happy. And whenever I see, whether it's bantam chooks or lots of chooks clucking around, it just warms my soul. And going to this women's group was like all these beautiful big bantam chickens, these older women, just all fluffing, and they were all wonderful. And I used to just sit there. I would say nothing, and I would often have my knees up on the chair and I'd be shaking or crying. But Barb was my favourite. And I used to just want to put my head in her lap every time she shared. I just was so malnourished for that kind of wisdom and tenderness and humour. And she also had a son, and she was also married. And I thought, I heard about sponsorship and getting a mentor in recovery, and I thought, I just want to feel like that woman. I want to be that gentle and funny and smart, and she's always been a very clever career woman. Anyway, I would never have gone up to her and spoken to her, and I think there was one day I asked to share, and I did, and I couldn't say much, and I was crying, and I remember she tapped me on the knee and she said, "Would you like a cup of love?" And I couldn't speak, I just nodded. And from that day to this, we have consistently held each other's hand, and I say this with absolute amazement because it's been a miracle for me and nothing less. We've both been privileged with consistent sobriety, one day at a time. We've gone mad and crazy and been I've been all over the shop. Lots of things have happened. But it's just, I've always known at 2 a.m, I could ring this beautiful woman.
You always make me cry.
And she would come and hold my hand. Also, too, I didn't know that I was going to have to deal with chronic post-traumatic stress. And Barb was the woman that helped me get into a psych ward and helped me get into therapy and detox some of that. So I'm going to shut up now. I just wanted to perhaps we can start there because you had a year up when I met you.
I did. I think I was 14 months clean and sober and feeling just an entirely new life. In fact, I remember, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but I remember being very proud of myself and thinking I was doing very well. And then you came into my life. And I can remember thinking, fuck, I'm going to kill this girl if I don't do this correctly. And I came to understand that I had never admitted I didn't know something because I was afraid to ask in case it was something I was already supposed to know and I'd make myself look foolish. And when you came into my life, I realised I had to let go of that. And I had to start asking older, sober, recovered people for advice. And God, you had questions. I used to think, my God. And you taught me very early on to say, I don't know, but I'll find out and get back to you, and then go and do it.
Can I just also just pause you there for a moment, Barb? I think what I found fascinating about you, and anyone watching this who doesn't understand what alcoholism is, because I mean, there are people that emotionally medicate. There are people that get pissed and get in trouble with booze. And that also does need, any weapon of mass distraction that you use to emotionally numb off. I think for all of us, as we get older, it needs to be addressed. But alcoholism, that raging addiction, I always thought that an alcoholic was a man or woman you saw in the park somewhere, walking around talking to the sky. Can you just unpack it? Because, you were a career woman working, at the top of the tree, travelling around the country. Can you just describe how your alcoholism manifested? Because I remember hearing you thinking, wow, it was...
Okay. My dad was alcoholic, and I grew up being determined not to be an alcoholic like my father, and had no concept of what an alcoholic was. And so what I really thought was that I would not grow up and be a drunk. I was determined for that. And,
drink like a lady.
Drink like a lady. And,
I remember my father saying that, taking me to have a cocktail when I was 16, teaching me to drink like a lady, and we got smashed.
I don't think I ever had a drink with my father. I think, I remember when I was 22, my father had he was a really clever engineer. He was the first town clerk of a place called Gove in Nuremberg, and he had an alcohol-induced brain bleed. And I was 22 years of age, and I remember sitting with my mother in front of a doctor called Ruth Salento, who was way ahead of her time. And she looked at us and said that George had had an alcoholic brain bleed.
Can I just pause you there as well?
Yes.
Now, I know my father at 49 also had a cerebral hemorrhage, but he was in Papua New Guinea. And I'm interested, because you and I know through years of working in hospitals and working with people that are experts in their field, that alcohol abuse corrodes our internal world in a way you just can't see. Can you tell me how she knew? Because, I knew my father had a big night on the red before he died, and they just called it a cerebral hemorrhage. But how did they know it was an alcohol-induced brain bleed? How did they know that?
Probably from the rest of his physical workup, the state that he was in.
Probably his blood alcohol level
his
as well.
Blood alcohol level, his level of malnutrition, because, while he was a functioning executive, he had really ceased to eat. He was living on alcohol.
Yeah.
And so his, in terms of nutrition in his body, and, those sorts of things in the brain, damage. But anyway, she looked me in the eye and said that alcoholism was a genetic disease, and it followed the same rules of other genetic disease. And I can remember feeling as though she had pointed the bone at me. I just felt as though I knew with every fibre of my being that I was going to get a Guernsey.
Can I just pause you there too? And I think, again, just through observation, we hear there are many different theories on alcoholism and the gene, and is it a disease?
Yes.
Is it a disorder? At the end of the day, we know it's shit when it's you. And I've observed through seeing, over the last 20 odd years, thousands of clients privately and through workshops, and I have observed that XY chromosome tracking far stronger in cross-gender, so father, daughter, mother, son, that zigzag, than the same gender. Yep. I've just found it fascinating. And if I go through my family history, that addictive gene can manifest. We were just talking earlier, many of my elite athletes, whether they're Olympians or, celebrity athletes, often had a morbidly obese parent. I remember when I was on the board of the Queensland Intravenous AIDS Association a few years back, and we were doing research in Queensland, and they found that 92% of all the IV drug users accessing the service had alcoholic parents. So it's kind of like the addiction manifests in a pleasure centre, whether it's food, whether it's injecting drug use. You know, the amount of, you know, when I go into a rehab and you've got the heroin users here, you've got the pill poppers here, and the socialites, you've got the marijuana, you know, smokers and the alcoholics, and they all, this bullshit elitism that, you know, there's superior and inferior ways of using. And, you know, the marijuana smokers don't even really think it's a big deal because they're a fucking vegan. And then the cocaine users, you know, it's just a problem. They're going through a divorce. And I always say to them, you're like a room full of people in a weight loss clinic. It doesn't matter if it's KFC, ice cream or chocolate that got you here. It's that obsessive compulsive need to numb off and that escapism. And I think, again, you know, you're talking about having that bone pointed. I remember having a chat to a professor. My boys were 7 and 9 when I got clean and sober, and they are now 32 and 30. And I remember my father being a big drinker, never an autopsy being done, but I knew he thrashed alcohol and I knew he was a man angry at the world. And he also died at 49. And I remember his mother being a morbidly obese woman. And I remember thinking, my God, does this mean, I remember saying to this professor, does this mean my boys are going to be addicts? And he said, Cynthia, it means they come from a very loaded gene pool. And we can have a discussion about nature or nurture. But if you had a breast cancer gene, you would certainly inform your children. And as it played out, we know my oldest son, who's been clean and sober for 8 years, at 23. So my father's life ended at 49. My rock bottom came at 33. And then my oldest boy at 23. And look, you know, if either of my boys have little girls, we will just be watching that. But then again, I think that getting a Guernsey and that genetic thing that you were told that day, and you were 22 when you were told that.
I was 22 when I was told that, and I was very frightened by that. I already was a perfectionist, very driven. Nothing was ever good enough. I would focus on a goal and I would pursue it relentlessly. I would achieve that goal. And then 5 minutes later, I would think, this wasn't it either, and move on to the next one.
Because you always, you know, you were always climbing the ladder in all of your careers. You're always the most awarded person.
Because I believe that I always felt that satisfaction and happiness was at the next level if I could just achieve it. And so I had been extremely careful with alcohol because I was afraid of it. But I discovered alcohol as a performance drug. So I was, you know, I was never a party animal. I was extremely boring. I never drank socially.
You told me you'd go to a party then come home and drink after your husband and kids were in bed.
Yes,
and
yes.
David was in bed.
And I know now that my alcoholism had progressed to such a stage where I instinctively knew that once I started to drink, I couldn't control when I would stop and how much I would have. And so I had instinctively observed that in myself, and because I didn't want them to find out, whoever them were, I felt safer drinking where I could, where I wasn't seen. You know,
so it was shame-fueled.
It was. And it was also a reward as well for getting through a social event. I'm not a very social person. And but I remember clearly the first time I knew that alcohol had done something special for me. And I just didn't know it didn't do it for other people. I was an appalling liar. I would never have admitted to being a liar because I told lies to get what I wanted. And
give me an example.
Oh, okay. I went for an interview for a job that I wanted. And I wanted this job because it came, we're talking, I was 18. I didn't have a driver's license. You got your driver's license at 18 in those days. And I didn't have a driver's license. And they certainly didn't want to employ an 18-year-old. And so I told them that I was 24. And I told them that I had a driver's license, and it seemed perfectly reasonable to me. I just wanted the job. And so I was asked if I could deliver a training. And of course, I mean, I might have been a liar, but I wasn't an idiot. They wouldn't have asked that if they hadn't wanted it as part of the job. So I said, of course. I was, vastly experienced in that area. And I had the ability to think I would never have to pay the piper. And I got the job. I mean, who wouldn't give me the job? I ticked all the boxes. And I got the car. I remember it, a V8 Falcon station wagon, and I drove it 2 weeks before I got a driver's license. But anyway, sometime thereafter, not very long, I found myself out the back of a room full of people that I was to deliver a training lecture to. And I had never spoken to a group of people before in my life.
And you're 18.
And yes,
Bloody hell.
18. Legally, going on 24. Anyway, my boss at the time came along and he put a whiskey and ginger ale in my hand, and he said to me, "Drink this, it will settle your nerves." And so I drank it, and I just, looking back, my perception of my situation changed. I went from being terrified to, they were bloody lucky to have me. And I went out there and took my glasses off so I couldn't see anybody's face, and I delivered my lecture, and I knew what would settle my nerves. And nobody gave me another drink that night, but I had found out what would fuel any situation where I felt nervous or unsure.
And can I just pause you there, Barb, because people talk a lot about anxiety, which is exactly what he was saying. And I always... I personally always say anxiety is the app we need to download in adolescence, 15 to 25, because anxiety is always about caution, new territory, go at your own pace, listen to what's right for you. There's no train track here, you haven't done this before. Anxiety is always present when you're in new territory. And like many Australian males and females, what you and I both did, and we call it Dutch courage, we call it taking the edge off. What we're doing is emotionally medicating. And when you give, and also too, I think you made a very interesting point. What I observe, and I will say this, in about 85 to 90% of the cases of all the addicts I work with, they're more introverted temperament. So they're quieter people. And an introvert's not a shy person. An introvert doesn't lack confidence, and an introvert is not a poor communicator. An introverter is an observer. When you look at in tribal culture, you need the observers and you need the people that are get up and extroverted community connectors. It's not about being better or worse, right or wrong. We need, on a sliding scale, from 1 to 10 people, if a 5 is an ambivert, which is often a person who's great at mediation, they like quiet time, they like to connect, and you've got the 10s, the raging extroverts, the 1s are a recluse. And, I, like you were saying, for introverts, in Western culture, we tend to champion the extrovert. Not so much in Asian cultures, to be quieter and observant is, to be seen as a little bit more respectful. But and again, it just depends on what home you grow up in. But for many introverts, they find when they're, anxious and they've got to project. And you listen to the likes of, Billy Connolly talk about his introversion. Now, watching him on stage, you would not pick him as an introvert, but he is. Robin Williams. Many. I've got a client. She's a very well-renowned Australian actress, and she's chronically introverted, but my God, so recognised and so powerful on a stage. And I remember her saying to me, Cynthia, the only time I'm really honest and I'm really me is when I'm in character.
Yes.
Because then I give myself absolute licence to express a dimension of myself that I would never dare express in everyday life. So, sorry, I just want to get back to your story in a moment, Barb, but I just wanted to make that point about taking the edge off, because we hear a lot about anxiety being some sort of fucking enemy now panic attacks are a different thing, and panic attacks are a byproduct of decades, years and years and years of medicating anxiety, and all of a sudden you haven't got a drink, you haven't got cocaine, you haven't got a substance, and you've got to do something, and you escalate because you've got no emotional muscle to self-care when you're anxious, which is basically, and this is why I fell in love with you, your capacity to touch me, hold my hand, go, you're right, love. Which is what, that beautiful saying, we must become the parent we needed when we were younger. When we're in adolescence, we must be able to hold our own hand and go, of course you're anxious, you haven't done this before. Go in before I go and speak at a keynote, go in the loo. I've got my back here. I'm just going to be my best. I don't have to be perfect. I just have to give my best and that'll be enough. So isn't that interesting? And I love the way you unpack that. You went from being in your natural state, anxious and not working the muscle, which you and I have worked together in, of course I'm anxious, I'm going to be fine. I've got the goods, I can do this, to a good old bloody Scotch and dry and rocket man, off you go.
Yes.
So that's fascinating. And so you used it for performance enhancing.
And that's how I used alcohol. What I didn't understand was that, and didn't see until it was too late, was I gradually needed more to do the same thing. And so it went from, I was so enamoured of what a Scotch and ginger ale did for me. It took me years to work out I could do it without the ginger ale and get rid of that rubbish. But it allowed, alcohol just allowed me to do so many things and
because it numbed off the anxiety.
Yes, I used it. But as we now know, I did not develop the ability to, why would I? A drink did for me what, all of that emotional work, it was fast, it was accurate, it did the job. I didn't need to have a bottle. No one knew. So it was perfect.
So would you have a shot? Because I seem to recall you telling me you would drink when you came home. So how did you have enough in your system to glide through the next day? Is that how it worked?
Look, I believe as I aged and I guess developed some skills, I think in retrospect, I learned to compartmentalise, to store up the day's anxiety and worries and the things that I fretted about until blessed release and relief of being able to drink at night. And so and I listened, you read a book, you hear people talk, you watch a film and people talk about having a glass of wine to, get rid of the stress of the day. So that's what I
And it's almost
myself.
endorsed if you're a mother. Wine o'clock.
Absolutely.
Can I just interrupt again, Barb? I was actually, because Barb's birthday is very close to Mother's Day, and I was buying a card for you just recently, and I went into the card shop and I was looking for a birthday card, not a Mother's Day card, but I noticed this section of Mother's Day cards that were just, and I will tell you about 75% of them were all about motherhood and drinking and wine o'clock. And again, there's nothing wrong with a glass of wine at the end of the day. However, if you're a recovering alcoholic like we are, it's going to start to build momentum. Some people can have a joint here and there. Some people can have a line of Coke here and there. Some people can have a drink here and there. Some people can go on a hen's night and party. But if you're like us, you've got that predisposition, you are just building a flame that's going to burn your internal world down.
Exactly, and that's what it did for me. And I think too, as my disease progressed and time went by, I had married a man who was a big drinker and a party animal. And I think now that I felt some protection from that.
But he was not alcoholic.
But he was not.
Big, burly Australian lifesaver.
Exactly. And he turned around and stabbed me in the back. I would come home and, desperate to start drinking. And I would say to him, would you like a drink, love? And he would say, who's coming? And, who's coming over? Because for him, alcohol was synonymous with the social.
He never drank alone.
He never drank alone. And it really annoyed me that he wouldn't drink with me to give me cover. And when I would say no one was coming, he would say, oh no, just have a cup of tea.
And I think that was really interesting because I remember you telling me when you first got sober that people were surprised that you were the alcoholic because no one ever saw you.
No one saw me drink.
We call him King Trev. He's as large as life. He's now, how old is he now?
He's 78.
Yeah, but he's still this beautiful, big, burly, salty man with stories, and he's just an amazing man. But again, if, he's with the young, our boys, and they're at a wedding or whatever, he's out there drinking with the rest of them. But yeah, it's not alcoholically.
No, he never thinks. He doesn't think that alcohol is for anything other than
Celebration.
Yeah. And I really was very dirty on him for that.
I was like that as well.
Well, I had to. Fortunately for me, I know. Talk about stabbed in the back. But luckily for me, he was a builder, and so he would start work at 4:30 in the morning, and so I was able to insist he go to bed early at night, and along with our son. And I was always very diligent at putting them both to bed as early as I could so that I could start to drink.
Yeah, your son seems to have skipped that gene.
Yes, he does, and which is not unusual.
Yeah, because it can skip a generation.
It can. And both he and his wife, they actually have a baby due very soon.
Oh, no.
And it's a girl. But they are both, my daughter-in-law has alcoholism in her family, though, the gene has skipped her. And they're both educated and aware.
Yeah. And it's not the end of the world. You can just do a U-turn.
It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
In fact, alcoholics and addicts are my favourite people.
Oh, God,
I like, which is such a funny thing to say. But I never had a drink in the morning, ever. My father was a morning drinker. I never once, even on holidays, had a drink in the morning.
See, I was having them in the morning, that little shot of tequila.
Yes, but it's just... people talk about alcoholics having no willpower. I find alcoholics to have extreme willpower, and I was never ever going to have a drink in the morning, because if I did, that meant it would make me alcoholic. I would be like my father. God knows I needed it, but I never ever had it. And as time went by, because I couldn't drink socially and I needed to drink earlier at night, my poor husband, I was forever knocking back social engagements, or my MO was that I would accept them and then I would think of some incredibly complex story as to why we couldn't go at the last moment. And so many of our friends did not know that I was alcoholic, but they knew something was awfully wrong. They knew something was terribly wrong. And I've one girlfriend, when I told her that I was alcoholic, she said, "Thank God." She said, "I really wondered whether you had a brain tumour." She said, "I was so worried about you. You were, just the hiding." And
Well, it's a shame. Can I just ask you, Barb, can you talk about the day you asked for help?
Yes. I know now that my alcoholism, I was running out of time. And you hear a lot of discussion about people's rock bottoms.
How old were you?
And I was 42. And I had this sense of impending doom for some time. And I had this overwhelming sense that they were going to find out. And I didn't know who they were, and I didn't know what
They're bloody scary, aren't they?
They're scary, whoever they are, if I ever find them. And I was doing super well at work. I was the estate manager for a major cosmetic company. And I had a wonderful husband, I had a beautiful child, and I was, this impending doom was just getting worse and worse and worse, and the anxiety. I would drink to pass out stage every night, and I would come to in the morning with an awareness of anxiety that I couldn't explain.
And also too, for many people, they don't understand what alcohol, whilst it anaesthetises anxiety, it's also a depressant, it's a downer.
Yes.
So you feel like shit.
You do, and the anxiety and the fear, and it's nameless fear. You don't know what the hell the fear is connected to. Anyway, I actually, a couple of weeks before I got help, I was reading a magazine in The Dentist, and I read this magazine and I was overwhelmed with relief. I read all of these symptoms and signs in this article, and I was so relieved that I actually pinched the magazine, left the dentist without going in, raced back went to see my GP, who is still my GP today, and said to her, "Oh my God, I know what's wrong with me. I'm menopausal." And
At 42.
I was reading all this anxiety, sleeplessness, all of this sort of.
Yeah.
I thought, great, thank God. And she said, "You're not menopausal, you're mad, go away." And anyway, it was about 2 weeks later on a Friday night, my husband and son were watching some silly movie, and I needed to start drinking. David was 12, and I can still see them. They were sitting on the couch with their arms around each other, killing themselves laughing at some stupid movie that they were just having the best time. And I needed to start drinking, and I was pacing in the kitchen and pacing and pacing.
And had you had a drink and they were up, would they have said anything?
No, they wouldn't have even noticed.
So it's the insanity in your head.
Yes,
okay.
I was just insane. I needed to start drinking, and I needed to start drinking how I needed to drink. And they wouldn't go to bed. And they usually went to bed and they wouldn't go. And it was 9:30, would you believe? 9:30 when this movie finished. And I was pacing in the hallway, and I can still see them. They came walking up the hallway toward me. My husband had his arm around my son, and they were laughing. And I stood there and screamed at them. And I stood there and screamed at them. Did they know what time it was? What the hell did they think they were doing? Get to bed. And the look on both of their faces, they couldn't have been more shocked, if no matter what I'd done. And I realised I could see myself. I'm standing there screaming at my husband and son on a Friday night because they wouldn't go to bed early enough for me to start drinking. And they both scuttled past me, and I started drinking. And that was, look, it might not sound much as a rock bottom's go. Everyone's rock bottom is different, but that was mine.
You observed yourself?
I did, yeah. And so I probably drank more that night than I'd drunk, before, and kept going, the Saturday night and the Sunday night, and on the Monday, I rang and asked for help. And
who'd you ring? You rang a 12-step line?
I rang a 12-step line, and I wanted to go to a meeting. I only wanted it to be women because I was really angry with my father for having given me this disease, and I didn't want anything to do with men. There was no sense.
So you felt sure you were alcoholic at that point?
Yes, without even knowing what it was.
Yeah. So you just rang a helpline.
Yep.
And, okay.
They actually offered to send someone to see me. And I was absolutely appalled at the thought that these people would come to see me.
It's a cult.
I know. And I thought, how you see little pizza cars getting around with the pizza thing on top? I absolutely believed if I let these terrible people come to see me, they would come with a flashing light, flashing the name of the 12-step program on top of it. I was quite insane. And, but they told me...
Because we're really sane now, Barb.
We're really sane now. Sanity is vastly overrated. But anyway, I went to my first meeting, and there was about 30 women. And I thought
Was that the meeting I met you at?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought I was in the wrong place because I didn't really know what alcoholics look like. I wasn't sure what they looked like. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother, collapsed and died in the street in Hendra in 1935. And she was an alcoholic woman, and my mother always said she was a terrible woman, my father's mother. And all she was an alcoholic. And she died very young. And I couldn't see any terrible women there. They were mothers, there were women in suits.
That's the biggest shock, isn't it?
It is the biggest shock.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't like to ask where the alkies were. And I remember being told in that meeting two things. I only remember two things. I was told that I wouldn't need to have another drink. I might want to, but I wouldn't need to. And the relief. And I don't to this day know why I didn't say, what a load of shit, you know. But it was like I was
Music to your ears.
Yeah, I was just given permission, and they said to me, just don't drink, you know, just for today. And I didn't say what a load of shit. It's just semantics, you know, none of that. I just remember feeling this incredible relief, and I went home, and when I wanted to drink that night, I remembered it was a woman. Her name was Liz. She's gone now, but she
remember Liz.
Yeah, she looked me in the eye and she said, you might want to drink, but you won't need to. And I can remember that night. And the next day was the Mooloolaba Yacht Club ball, and that we always went to. And I couldn't tell my husband, and I couldn't tell our friends, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I remember I woke up Saturday morning without a hangover for the first time in a long time, and with hope in my heart. And I just made sure we were running late to get there, so that I could take my car and say that I was the designated driver. And a dear friend's husband kept nagging me to drink that night, and I kept saying I didn't, so I told her. And I told her that night, and she was shocked, but she was supportive, and she nearly bit her husband's head off the next time he asked me to have a drink. She yelled at him, "For fuck's sake! Hasn't she told you often enough? Leave her alone."
Helen?
That's Helen.
Yeah, she's now passed, hasn't she?
She has, yes, yeah. And she was really supportive. She didn't say to me, "No, you're not an alcoholic."
You find out who your friends are and who they aren't.
Don't you?
Yeah, you move from a social circle to a heart circle.
You do.
Every now and then I try and step into a social circle. It never lasts. It doesn't work for me. I've got to keep it really tight.
That's right.
And very authentic people.
The really funny thing that I noticed too about people was, you know, when I told people that I was alcoholic and I no longer drank, people who felt a need to defend their own drinking would push back. I've spilt more than you've drunk.
Yeah.
You know, all of that.
I remember, you know how we were talking earlier, there was a couple down the road that I used to party with, and they both used to have a heroin addiction. But they had come into becoming heavy marijuana smokers. Every time we went there, they grew marijuana in the backyard. Great couple, very interesting. And I remember when I came out as an alcoholic, and I knew the female had a father who was a chronic alcoholic who had rotting teeth and used to soil himself. And I know he was a very upsetting alcoholic for her.
Yeah.
And I remember her going off her trolley going, "Oh, for fuck's sake, you are not an alcoholic."
Yes.
What the fuck? And then I remember later on, after my first book came out and Mary Ryan's were doing a launch, and because she said that her and her husband were recovered from addiction, and I was not an alcoholic because I didn't know what an alcoholic was. And I remember her ringing. I was about to do a book signing and launch at Mary Ryan's, and I remember them saying to me, "We're a bit concerned. There was a very troubling message on our answering machine overnight," and it was her at 2 a.m. ranting. And I had so many people outraged because all the people I drank and drugged with drank and drugged like me.
Yes.
Calling me a fraud, calling me a liar. And she was slurring. It was 2 a.m. This fucking woman, she's a fucking liar, she's fraud. And she was just going on. And as I listened to it, I just felt so sad. And that was kind of like the falling away of a whole network of friends. And this is often who people I thought were friends, but they were people I partied with and associated with. And that, I think that's a very interesting thing. But I also want to talk about, I remember when I met you, and you claiming the word alcoholic as if it was, you know, just a handbag you had in the wardrobe. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a part of your world. And because my boys were so small, I want to tell the story.
Oh, yeah.
Because I became a single mum, and it was a tumultuous time. And Barb lives out in Brisbane. There's a beautiful area called Samford, and it's there's acreage, and she's got a beautiful dam, and they have horses and cows and chooks, and it was just lovely to go out there and decompress just from all the turmoil. And my boys, beautiful Trevor, he's like, you know, I remember my youngest boy who Trevor calls Ferret. Because we have a shortage of older men, and I remember Mitchell, I remember my younger one, sorry, I can take that out. I remember my youngest one, Trevor ducking down to say goodbye to him. So Trevor was squatting around him, and my youngest son was, you know, he was 7, so he was little, and this big bear of a man squatting around him, and all he could see was this neck that was just craped. Yeah. And Trevor looked at him and said, "It's like a crocodile, isn't it?" And I could just remember this little face looking at this neck that was so weathered of this man he'd had, and realising he didn't have any men that old in his life up close, because his little finger was on it, just kind of tracing it.
So important.
But the night before, I was having a meltdown at your home, and you were baking or whatever else, and you needed something, or maybe I think you were going to get fish and chips. So you and my youngest son, and he was in his jammies, popped down to Sanford Village, and there was an RBT, and you pick it up from there, Bob.
Oh yes, that was really funny. We were driving along. Mitchie was. I'm sorry.
The younger one?
The younger one.
The baby one.
The good-looking one. Was that's just not true. They're both divine. Was sitting next to me in the front seat, and we were pulled over by a random breath test, and there was a young constable who appeared to be in training, because, you know, the more senior man behind her. She stepped up to the window and asked me to blow in the random breath test. And this little fella leant across me to the open window and said, "It's okay, she doesn't need to do that, she's an alcoholic." And this girl sort of went, "Boop," and then continued with her spiel, and I blew into the device, and it was clear. And she said, "You know, thank you, that's clear." So himself leans back over me again and said to her, "I told you she was an alcoholic."
And I think that word for us, and I was the same, finding out that there was a solution to my problem was a relief. And the word, it's alcoholism, was like somebody opened a window and the sunshine came in, and we now had some fresh air and a fresh perspective. Barb, I just want to change course here, because I've interviewed quite a few people in this web series, and one thing that I see in my private practice, but also too, I've interviewed another woman in this series who's had breast cancer. Mm-hmm. And again, these are just my observations. I never pretend to be clinical. I'm a lived experience model. I just share observations, agree with them, disagree with them. What I've observed, alcoholism and breast cancer is a very interesting one as well, and I'd like you to unpack that in a moment. But what I've observed, and again, we know that cancer is a dis-ease, when we are at dis-ease, and I've worked with many amazing naturopaths and Reiki masters and people that are experts on chakras, and there are so many amazing modalities to diagnose the human condition, and some of the ancient ones are really fascinating, the chakra centers, and you know, the heart chakra being green and the evolved being pink. And so chakra is a Sanskrit word that simply means wheel of energy. But what I observe in women that get breast cancer, what I observe in their temperament is they are usually what I would call over-nurturers. They are women that give. Now, if you think of the breasts being the place that the mother actually gives milk, gives her life force to the child. And there is such a thing as giving away more energy than you have. And I had a really interesting client here the other day, and she's a beautician, and a very successful one. Her practice, she's got a chain of stores, and she's very successful. And just one of these women like you, I just fall in love with, because she's such a nurturer. She's funny, she's wicked, she loves life, she loves men, loves her kids. And you go and get a facial with her, and it's like you are transported with the angels, the love and the care, which is what I always found with you. You know, every time I see you, you bring me flowers, you know, you're tender with my children. You just always have been so nurturing. And it's very easy when you've got a malnourishment of that to get drunk on that, to have a mother crush. Now, again, what I've seen is often women that get breast cancer are the women that anybody that knows them and loves them will tell you she will do anything for you. She is so generous of spirit. She is a nurturer. But often these are women that are not very boundaried in emotional self-care. And whilst it's a wonderful thing, you know, and you were the first one to tell me you can't give away what you haven't got. And if we don't self-care and self-nurture and have be boundaried and say no, making sure that our output doesn't throw us out of balance, the body, pay the piper, as you said, it will present a bill. And I will say, and this is, you can just get shitty with me and cranky with me because we...
Hardly.
Well, the thing is, and I think, you know, I think one of the lovely things about heart relationships, about heart family is you've seen me at my worst. I have yelled at this woman. I've ordered her out of my house in my early recovery because she keeps fucking showing. I remember I thought, this woman's either gay or desperate. Nigel, no friends, because why the fuck does she keep coming over bringing me stuff? I'm not going to put out for her. What is wrong with her? And I just didn't know what to do with her. And I remember one day when you came over, I was just falling apart. And I couldn't, your kindness was like disinfectant on a wound. I just wanted you fucking away from me. And I remember just being a bitch. And then you drove off and said, love, I'm going to leave you. And you were so fucking nice to me. And then I think you probably hadn't got down the end of the street and I rang you crying, apologising. And I remember you saying to me, love, you know, it's absolutely normal for you to be angry, you know, with your story of trauma and all that sort of stuff. And I understand me not wanting anything from you is upsetting. And you said, I'm not frightened of you. And because I was scared of my warrior bitch, but you weren't. The man I'm married to now, he's not scared of her either. He just stands there and makes her a cup of tea. But it used to be able to frighten me and push people back. And I remember you saying to me, love, when you get cross with me like that, I don't mean to offend you, but it's like watching a dog bark at a mirror. It doesn't frighten me. And I was so relieved that I didn't frighten you. But I'm going to say this anyway. So I remember when I first, you know, we've been in each other's lives, you know, 24 years. I remember everybody had a mother crush on Barb. And Barb is known throughout the fellowship as Beautiful Barb because nobody meets her and doesn't fall in love with her because she's always bringing baked goods, she's always kind, even if you're a bitch on wheels or an asshole, she will just be kind. And she has got a little bloody following. And I used to get very jealous of that and pissed off at that because I wanted to be the chosen one. But then I started to realise that there were so many malnourished females. But I used to get concerned because I used to watch your output be so big. And I remember every now and then I'd ring up and I could hear your husband going, not another fucking one. I could hear him just, he could not mask that was probably the 15th phone call on a Sunday night in the middle of you trying to put a roast out. Do you observe, now, and Barb, I'd like you to unpack the story of breast cancer, disagree with me, any of my observations there, and just talk us through what you learned about yourself during that time. Because I do believe the body will put you flat on your ass and make you stop, because often when we're in survival and our ego self, which is what an addiction does, it takes you up into those pleasure centres. We're in fight, flight. There are 4 of them: fight, flight, freeze, and friend. And friend is, oh, you're being an asshole, I'll do more nice things for you, which isn't always helpful. It can be enabling. So the opposite of fight and flight is rest and repair. And we must do that for ourselves on a daily basis. So what, in all of that, what are your thoughts?
Look, I have never seen the light. I always have to feel the heat. And so I've never made a change in my behaviours or accepted a reality or without, I always think when it's a good idea to rest and repair or something of that nature, the universe just gently touches me on the shoulder. My MO has always been to shrug that shoulder and turn the volume up. And I find,
I've got a to-do list, be quiet.
Exactly. And so I find that, there's no judgment from God or from the universe, whatever you want to say. It's just that I get a little heavier push. Now, I was such an expert at shrugging that off that I do believe that the universe just kept turning up the volume, and eventually it was a diagnosis of breast cancer that got my attention.
How long ago was that now?
It must be 8 or 9 years ago now.
Yep.
And the really funny thing about being diagnosed with breast cancer was the lack of fear that I had.
I remember.
Yeah, around it. It was, and just the, and I remember people would have thought anyone who didn't know me well enough would have thought I was totally nuts. I had a little laugh to myself and thought, okay, I get it. I finally get it. And I chose to have a mastectomy, and which, I did successfully. And I also chose to a mastectomy as opposed to any form of treatment, chemotherapy or radiation. That was a personal choice.
You did shave your head. My husband actually shaved your head.
That's right. Why I did that was because I chose not to have chemo or radiation. I preferred a radical surgery to that. And around about the same time, a close friend's little nephew died at the age of 5, of hemoblastoma, a childhood brain cancer. And along came the Shave for a Cure fundraising. And I think it was just a matter of control. I'm very fond of being, as a woman and as an alcoholic, I'm very fond of control. And it's a battle I fight all the time to control my controlling. But I had not lost my hair without my permission. I had not been the victim of the side effects of chemo. So I made a decision that I wanted to shave my hair to fundraise for childhood cancers, specifically leukemia. And I felt so empowered by that decision.
I know. I remember my husband, we had morning tea, everyone came over.
Yes.
And I was crying as your head was shaved, and you were quite liberated.
And actually, if it hadn't looked so shit, I would have loved to have stayed that way. It was the freest thing I've ever had, was having a shaved head. But I remember raising $10,019 and one American quarter. I have no idea who threw in the American quarter. But what was really funny too was my gorgeous son, he decided that he would do it as well with me, and he came home from the bush and the boys shaved him at the pub, and the local Sanford pub, and I didn't go to see that, but I'll never forget him coming home because of course they were shaving his head, and someone in the audience yelled out $100 for each eyebrow. And they shaved his eyebrows off, and he came home, and it was such a shock to look at him because he did look without the eyebrows as though, but I found that it was kind of a fuck you to breast cancer. It was just I have the power over my hair, not some disease. And I found it very freeing. And
I must admit, I remember coming and sitting with you the morning after you had your radical surgery, and we were holding hands, and this was just an amazing thing to watch your spirituality in action, because it's almost like I saw you, and you said something interesting before, control my controlling, which for any alcoholic, we know the only antidote to control your controlling is to surrender.
Yes.
You're fucking powerless. There's some shit you are just powerless over. Surrender. You don't have this. Just surrender and allow love, light. I always love the unpacking of the word discipline. without any religious connotation. It just means to follow love and light.
Yep.
And love being self-care, which is a big component that people forget about. And so you were forced to rest and repair. But what I loved about observing you is that you surrendered. At a deeper level, you just surrender. Okay, got it. And I've personally observed in the last 8 to 9 years, you say no more. You pump the brakes more.
Yes.
You're always been very generous, still continue to be generous with your time to my family and to anyone that needs help. But you tend to you have slowed down on your output. I've just observed that.
I've learnt, the hard way, to give myself permission to do the things that I love to do, without judging myself about whether I should be allowed to do that. And interestingly, work is one of those things for me. I love to work.
Now, how old are you now, Barb?
68.
68. Now, this little ATN, talk us through that, little love heart. This is Barb's new little business, by the way.
I work with compression mechanical compression devices, and so
For people at home don't know what you just said, what is that?
Well, look, it probably just gets a bit, I don't want to do a full advertisement.
Well, compression socks and stuff after
compression
surgery.
Socks after surgery and for varicose veins and for
and
flying.
Barb's husband wears them with pride. He'll wear his Crocs. He'll wear his red check tartan ones for Christmas. Sometimes he'll wear his pink ones because
absolutely. And he wears them for a medical reason.
So if you need compression socks,
isn't she gorgeous?
Barb's your woman.
But for me, once again, it's when I turned 60, I chose a completely new career. It was put in my path, and I went from working with skincare, cosmetics, to working in the medical field, and just to see if I could do it, and I love it. And
at 60?
At 60, that was, it was a completely new career for me, and I've just loved it. And at 68, I do not want to be, I don't want anyone else making a decision when I'm over it. I don't want anybody else making the decision about how long I can work or whether or what I can do. So I made the next step and have started my own business at 68. So I no longer work for anybody else. I contract to other people, but I work for myself.
What's really interesting is that one of her staff, her husband Trev, we were sitting at the Sanford pub not long ago, and he's going, I've got the filing system organised, I've got the broccoli boxes and all colour-coded, God love him, he's your
so
storeman
cute.
and packer.
He is my storeman and packer, and whenever he does something that I don't like, he says, he says, I think that's above my pay grade. I do only what I'm paid for.
And can I also say, sorry, I kept interrupting you, Barb, I mentioned Barb and Trev a lot. Beautiful Barb and King Trev, because I always say to my clients when they come to work with me, I do have an agenda, and that's that you get a crack at your happily ever after, because that's the hardest life assignment there is. It's not a bloody, we call it a fairy tale and we scoff at it and get sceptical, but I personally believe that what we want to teach our children is to live happily ever after with themselves in their own skin, thought, feeling and action, and be proud of who they are as they evolve. Now, if you can nail your relationship with yourself, you can then have a crack at it with somebody else, because, if you haven't got a happily ever after with yourself, you're just going to crash and burn with anybody else. You won't be able to do it. Now, I know you and Trev, how many years have you been married?
We've been together 49 years.
And I'm going to put up a little photo of these two bloody lovebirds. He's like a rock star, and Barb was like a bloody... If you've ever seen Gilligan's Island, she was like Ginger on Gilligan's Island. Absolutely. I'm going to put some little pictures up here. But I think one of the loveliest things I've observed in having you in our family, in our tribe, and your beautiful mum Mary, who's 90, who is...
92.
If you're 92, if you want to know what a fairy godmother looks like, I'm going to put up a little photo of Mary as well. I mean, she's just this delightful matriarch. But the happily ever after, I know you and Trev have had all sorts of ups and downs over the years, but I think being in your company what I've always observed is there's this bond and this partnership, and you drive each other crazy, but there's always laughter. You two are good at having a bit of a laugh, not taking each other too seriously. And I suppose just as we start to, because I know you have to go and wind up, and there's a couple of things I'd like, you and I can talk all day, we catch up and we don't stop for 3 hours and then we've just scratched the surface. But I think for the viewers at home, I think part of the reason I fell in love with you 24 years ago was, even in the midst of getting sober, you've had this respect and this love for this man. And, Trevor grew up in an age where men were not really encouraged to have an emotional education. It was kind of provide, protect. He's a surfer lifesaver. He's a gladiator. There was a lot of stereotypical, narrow-minded views very much from men. Like, women prior to the 1950s in Australia weren't voting. There wasn't a contraceptive pill. So it was a very narrow field. And what I've watched with you two is this partnership has, unpacked. And I think I'd be interested in you just to give us some tips on what you think about partnership. And also too, and I think selfishly, because I'm a woman that's going to hit my sixth decade in a few years, and what I've always loved is I call you a lantern bearer, like a fairy godmother, because you've always just been, David's always just been a bit older, you've been able to talk to me about that. Your son got married, my oldest got married the year later. I've been able to kind of go, how does this feel, Barb? Give me some insight. But I suppose, first of all, would you unpack, your view on partnership and enduring the storms and the seasons of a long-term marriage? And then also, too, if we can just finish up on looking at what you can see, because I've noticed now the 30s are very different to the 40s, are very different to the 50s, what you would forecast. And again, we're all different women, but there are often some overarching milestones that if you are evolving and looking after yourself, the 60s provide. So can we start with the partnership with you and Trev?
I think while you were talking, I was trying to think of what I love and appreciate the most about my husband. And, it's lucky that we haven't got a lot of time, because he's far from perfect. I could give you the other side as well, but I think when I look back over the last 49 years...
Together?
We did have 2.5 years off for bad behaviour early in the part.
Before you got married?
Before we got married,
yeah.
Yes. We went out together for a couple of years. I met him when I was 19 and he was 29. And within 2 years, back then, you married around that age, 19, 20, 21, you married at that age. Women married at that age, and my girlfriends were marrying at that age. And Trevor was, he had spent 10 years sailing around the world on a yacht. The things that I absolutely, was attracted to about him were the things that prevented him from even thinking about marriage, that independence. And he also taught me, I had all the conversations in my head, not one of them with him. I didn't actually need him.
How often do women do that?
I know. I didn't need him. I knew what he was going to say. I would say this, he would say that, I would say that. And so the upshot was, I said to him after 2 years, it's over. Which there had been no conversation actually with him. It had all been, but I'd had it in my mind. And we had, I always say we had 2.5 years off for bad behaviour. And during that time, I became engaged to another man who fit the profile I thought I should be marrying. Was a totally nice man, but I just couldn't fall in love with him, no matter what I did. And
probably too obedient for you, Barb.
Probably. Yeah. Trevor was the one. And so we, we reconnected, and that's history. But the thing that I love and value the most about him of all of these years is he has never, ever tried to tell me what to do. He has always supported me in anything that I have wanted to do.
He backs you, doesn't he?
He always has. He has never said, shit, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, you should never once.
Wow.
It's always been.
That's unusual for a man of his
It
age.
is unusual for a man of his age, and I know that. It's always been.
We love Trevor, but anyone that knows him, he's very politically correct and many...
Well, he's narrow-minded, bigoted, racist.
Oh, he's not. He's not really, but I mean,
yes.
his language. If you didn't know him,
Yes.
you would think that.
But he's just so. He has an innate respect for equality, and he's never ever said, "Don't do that. You can't do that," or he's never ever displayed any form of ownership or inequality.
How liberating is that?
Yeah, and I think that's the overarching thing that I love about him. And, you know, when I was 60 and said, I don't think that I want to do what I've been doing my entire working career anymore. I'm going to go into a medical field that I have no education for, no understanding of. And he just said, you know, if that's what you want to do, love, you know, do it. He's always been, if that's, and he's been the same, you know, with David, our son. If that's what you want, then you do it. And I've learned from him, you know, two of my granddaughters, Abby and Miss Tara. Miss Tara is a sampler. She's like a little bee. She likes to go from flower to flower to test the honey. And so she announces she wants to do martial arts. So she does it for a little while and then she announced she doesn't want to do it anymore. It's interfering with her growth, she said. And then she wants to play a musical instrument, which she does for a little while. And, you know, her mum said to me about that, and I said, I think it's wonderful. Why would you say to a child, no, you wanted to try that, now you're stuck with it? You don't, in my opinion, you don't do that. You allow people to, you give them the space to see what works, what fits, what doesn't fit, and it's okay. There's no such thing as failure. There is just sampling, learning.
I'm going to interrupt you here as well because, again, this epitomises you and Trev. Now, Barbara and Trev adopt people they fall in love with. I remember when I first met you, you said, would you like me to adopt you as a daughter? I'm thinking, actually, I think I kind of would. Now, your granddaughters are your granddaughters. You talk about them so fluently, but they're not biological.
No.
You have adopted them because they didn't have a beautiful grandparents in their life. And you and Trev, again, like you've adopted our family, you're so generous of spirit. You're actually going to have a biological grandchild later in the year, but just anyone not realising that.
Yes.
You just, and I think this is another thing about you and Trev, you know, you have such a strong sense of family, and just because you're not biologically related doesn't mean you won't love as family.
No, we're having our 7th grandchild in August, which is super exciting for us. But, you know, I've been at the birth of, you know, 5 of the others. And, they are my heart's grandchildren. And you know, my 2 eldest ones actually have biological grandparents who are generous. They, you know, the generosity of sharing. Yes. And, you know, those little girls, they went through finding out that I wasn't biologically related to them, but they understand now that, you know, nanas choose them.
Yeah,
and
beautiful. So back to Trev, back to the love story. What else do you love about him? What's made it? So do you think that's been an overarching thing? I think for most women, most women that have a sense of self, to have a long-term relationship, even in a same-sex relationship, to have a partner that is all about backing you and giving you space.
Yes, he's always allowed me to be whoever I wanted to be at that time, even though that changes. And in fact, it's funny, when I realised when I was 6 months clean and sober, I was walking out the door this night to go to a meeting, you know, which was something that I did every night. And as I kissed him goodbye and said I was off, and he he said, "Oh, for God's sake, of all the obsessions you've had, this one has lasted the longest." And I realised I'd explained it to everybody else, and I had not actually sat down and explained to Trevor that I was alcoholic, what it meant. But his acceptance of me and whatever stage I was at. And so I actually sat down and explained to him what alcoholism was and what my journey had been. And he sat there and his eyes filled up with tears. And he said, "Where the hell was I?" Oh. And I said to him, I made sure you didn't see. You didn't know and you didn't see. But I've always been grateful for that. And I'm grateful for my obsession on recovery.
Well, I would call it a passion. And again, it's me just being a little pain in the ass with words.
Yes.
But people sort of say, I think I'm getting obsessive compulsive about something that's healthy. And I always say an obsession is fear-driven.
Yes.
A passion is love-driven. So a passion requires discipline and it adds love and light and self-respect to your life.
Yes.
An obsession is fear-driven and it adds shame and secrecy and it's corrosive of self-respect.
Yeah.
So, Barb, can we finish on talking about the 6th decade? What's it brought into your life? And what do you think for women, that you notice about your 6th decade of life as you started your own business? And did you notice anything specific?
I feel freer than I've ever felt. I feel as though I am able to be innately who I am and do what I want to do when I want to do it. More than any other decade in my life. Wow. And there are 2 women in my life who are at least 10 years older than me, Rhonda and Cheryl. And these 2 women are women who, personality-wise, they're as different as chalk and cheese. But they both inspire me. They're both in their late 70s, and they both have take on new projects all the time with joy and pleasure, and I just find it really. I get excited.
They're your lantern bearers.
They're my lantern bearers.
And then there's your mum,
and then
92.
Yes, and then there's my mum, 92, which gives me permission. The longevity in the maternal line in my family gives me permission to be excited about the projects and the things that these women, my lantern bearers, I know that I will have the health and the vitality and the ability to keep doing whatever I want to do, for the next 20, 30 years. And
because there's been your breast cancer's all clear.
Oh yeah, I'm healthy as a horse. And and the fact that my mum is healthy at 92 means
she's a little socialite, isn't she, really?
Oh, my God, she'd go to the opening of an envelope. She's very different to me in that she's very like my niece.
Isn't that interesting? She was more the extrovert and your dad was the introvert, the alcoholic.
Yes,
You often see that pairing.
And my younger sister died of this disease. She died when she was 50 of alcoholism.
How old were you then?
How old was I then? I must have been 52, 54, 50. I was 56.
Yeah.
I was 56
when your mum's lost 2
people. When she died. Yes, Dad and both to alcoholism. And I feel more positive and comfortable than I ever have before. And my husband is very active and well, and so
recently just rolled a tractor.
Oh yes, well, he's a little attention-seeking when it comes to that kind of thing. But
his foot was kind of hanging off.
Yes,
and he's now up and about again.
Oh yes, he degloved his lower leg. In fact, it was interesting. I always say that he was too stupid to know that his life had been irrevocably changed and was not going to bear any resemblance to what it had been. And so he acted that way. So of course he's made a full recovery and his life is exactly as it was before.
Yeah, he just got on with it, didn't he?
Yeah, because it just never occurred to him that he wasn't going to get his life back completely. Never occurred to him. The rest of us were all, making plans and changing things and, thinking of mobility devices and all of those sorts of things. And he drives a manual truck, and David and I and you and, all of us, we were aware that he would never be able to drive a manual vehicle again because of this injury to his left leg. And so we made plans for what we would do. And he was in hospital 3 months. He came home from hospital. The day he came home from hospital, I dropped him home and I went down to the shop, and I came back and the truck was gone and Trevor was gone. And I just did not know what to do. And while I'm standing there wondering what to do, he drove back into the yard and got out of the truck, and I screamed at him, where in the name of God have you been? And he said, what's wrong? I've been to the dump. And I'm like, you can't drive.
I know. And this was a man, when you go and visit him in hospital, it'd almost be a queue.
Yes.
It's almost like a revolving door because everybody loves Trevor and we just sit and hear his stories, but not once did you hear him complain.
He loved it.
Not once did he catastrophize.
No.
He just got on with it and being positive.
It is true. It's a good thing we haven't got any more time though. Otherwise I'd tell you how he behaves when he has a cold.
Oh, man flu. Well, that's a whole bloody web series.
Different
Bob,
things.
I know you have to go. I wanted to thank you for today. We will probably do a series 2, and we'll have King Trev in series 2, I think. So watch this space. Any last thoughts, Barb? If there's somebody sitting here listening to us, struggling with shame, or any last messages as we wind up today?
The thing that occurs to me continuously, I'm very open about the fact that I have alcoholism. I have no shame. Everybody about having alcoholism, I would not be ashamed of being an asthmatic. I would not be ashamed of being a diabetic. And I refuse to be ashamed of being an alcoholic. And so it's not something that I hide. The people I work with are aware that I am an alcoholic. I had shame about some of my behaviours when I was in my drinking days. But so the thing that I would say to anybody, if you think you have a drinking or drugging problem, if you think you may be alcoholic, reach out for help. The worst that can happen is you lead a happy, social, sober life, or that you find out you're not. And the easy way to find out if you're not an alcoholic is to stop drinking.
Yeah, try 90 days without drinking. You'll soon find out.
Find it.
What's the saying we used to say? I could stop if I wanted to.
I just don't want
to.
My record used to be 3 days.
Yeah.
I would stop drinking for 3 days to
72
prove
hours.
I wasn't an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And at the end of that, I would say, well, see, I'm not an alcoholic.
Or people
just
do
couldn't
dry
make it
July,
further.
they do October and go, see, an alcoholic can't stop, but it's like it's a corrosive disease. It's like seeing a person that gets cancer in the beginning and at the end, if they do nothing about it, it's corrosive.
Yes.
And addictions are very same.
Yes.
Thank you, beautiful Barb.
Thank you for the last 24 years.
Love you too. Thank you. And thank you for watching. Bye.
Thank you.